My name is Margaret Clements. I'm president of the Plan Commission, and for this CDO portion of the Plan Commission meeting, administrative meeting, I'd be glad to conduct it, and then I'll hand it off to my colleague Jeff Morris, who is vice president of the Monroe County Plan Commission. Is this mic on? Can you hear? Okay, great. Well, welcome and thank you for showing up tonight. And we're going to be reviewing the County Development Ordinance, and I'd like to take this moment to introduce Jackie Jellin Nestor, who is Director of our Planning Department. And if you would kindly introduce your staff. And
yes, many of them are actually helping out in the hallway, but
My name is Drew Myers. I'm Senior Planner at the Monroe County Planning Office.
and then we have several of our other planners that are either helping with a map exercise that we will be walking through in just a few minutes, or in the room next door helping to set up the Zoom.
yes, and then I'd like to turn to my colleagues who serve on the Plan Commission. If you would kindly introduce yourselves with Jeff Morris at beginning.
Sure. My name is Jeff Morris, and as Margaret said, I'm the Vice President of the Plan Commission.
Bernie Garitas. Jerry Pittsford, member of the Plan Commission.
Tron Enright Randolph, Monroe County Surveyor, Plan Commission member.
Edward Ullman, Plan Commission member.
And we have Dee Owens, who is online. She's also a member of the Plan Commission. Can you hear us, Dee?
I can hear, but my camera won't work, so hello and thank you.
Okay, and do you need to call the roll?
Yes, and then Cheryl Munson is also online.
Great, Cheryl, welcome. Can we hear you, Cheryl?
She's currently on mute, I think.
She is an elected member of the county council,
Yes.
but she is online.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I'm unmuted now.
thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
Looks like we have a great group tonight.
Yes,
So we have 8 members. Julie Thomas is going to be attending a few minutes late. She informed me she had another meeting, so we can go ahead and
Oh,
get started.
if
So-
you would call the roll.
Yep, sure. Jeff Morris. Margaret Clements. Bernie Garitas.
Here.
Jerry Pittsford.
Here.
Tron Enright Randolph.
Here.
Edward Ullman.
Here.
Cheryl Munson.
Here,
Dee Owens.
Here,
And Julie Thomas is going to be attending a little bit later. And then I don't believe our city representative, Chris Cockrum, is here. So we have 8 members. Quorum.
Great. So, well, do you want to lead us through the public input portion of the CDO?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is our 4th listening session, so we appreciate everyone coming out for the 4th and proposed final listening session. We're glad to get a great turnout. I'm going to go ahead and walk through just some information about the County Development Ordinance, where we are at, and then just our protocol for tonight's meeting. So the County Development Ordinance, we are currently in Module 2 of 3. We are focusing tonight's meeting on the use table and the draft zoning map. We also have drafted our definitions that can be helpful for utilizing the use table. We have a lot of great handouts out in the hallway in the atrium that could be utilized if you know what your proposed zoning is, or if you'd like to find out what your proposed zoning is. So in a little bit, I'm going to walk through how we'll organize tonight's meeting. But tonight, we're hoping to focus on the Module 2 items. So why do we need a new county development ordinance? The last entire update of the ordinance was in 1997, and since then, we've had piecemeal edits to the ordinance. The number of zones that we will have is going to reduce from 45 zones to 16 to make it a clear ordinance, more predictable and easier for the public to use. And the number of uses in the use table will be reduced from 372 to 174, all of those uses being consolidated. So just a little bit of information on the format of tonight's meeting and some ground rules for speaking. So you will be, the first part of this meeting is to discuss the county development ordinance, and then the second part, we're actually going to be following up with administrative items on our agenda. So if you're wanting to stay for the administrative items, we will take a quick brief break between the listening session and the admin items. But if you're here for the listening session, we do have an exercise where out in the hallway you can find what your existing zoning is as well as your proposed zoning. And we have a little handout that will be helpful for that, where you can work with a planner to locate your existing and proposed zoning. Once you have that information, if you have questions for a planner out in the hallway, they can help you. And then if you would like to come in and make a speech about it to the Plan Commission, we are going to be looking into any of the draft zones that need to be changed and making that ahead of the actual public hearing for the County Development Ordinance. So some of the things that we'd like to hear from you, some of the information we'd like to hear from you is, do you like your new zoning district? If not, is there a different zone that you think is more appropriate for your property, and why? Are there permitted uses or conditional uses on your property that are permitted that you have concerns with or that you like? And then is there anything in the neighboring properties that are zoned a certain way that you like or are concerned with? So those are all topics of discussion tonight. For those of you that are joining online, if you go to the monroecdo.com website, you'll be able to go to the Maps tab and find the draft zoning map. You can type in your address, and it will pop up an item like on the screen where you can see what your proposed zoning is as well as your current zoning. And there's also a direct link to submit a feedback survey. All of the information that we receive from any of these 4 listening sessions, we're going to be putting onto our map for the Plan Commission to review, and it shows a Likert scale of how satisfied you are with your proposed zoning, and then give some information on that as well for them to consider. So that's if you're joining us virtually. Out in the hallway, we do have printouts of the draft CDO. There's really helpful 2-pagers where on the 2 pages you can see what your proposed zoning district is and what are the existing primary uses and conditional uses that will be permitted in that zone. We also have a QR code for those of you that would like to view the Module 2 on a mobile device. So just a few ground rules for speaking. And again, this first session is for the CDO listening session. The administrative session after this, we will take a break and then hear about that. So if you want to come up to the podium and state your name and address of the property that you'd like to give a comment about, and then each individual will have 2 minutes to speak. And then if you have more than one property, you do get 2 minutes per property that you'd like to speak on. But we ask that you first sit down and let others come up and speak. And then if you have more time, come up again and speak to the other properties. And then we'll also help pull up an aerial on the screen if you'd like to just orient ourselves with the property that you're speaking of and what the draft zoning is. And then finally, we're going to alternate between people in person, and then we also have a good amount of attendees online. So we're going to switch between Zoom attendees speaking and in-person people speaking. And then lastly, we just want to note by taking your comment, if you don't feel the need to come up and speak tonight, you can also send us an email, planningoffice@co.monroe.in.us, with some information you'd like to submit for the Module 2 draft. Or, like I said, fill out a feedback survey for your specific property. We are going to be wanting those comments by October 31st so that we can get that back to the consultants and hopefully have a clean Module 2 draft before the end of the year. And just a reminder for these for these listening sessions, these are not public hearings. So before this actually goes for formal adoption, every Monroe County property owner will receive mailed notice as to when the meetings are going to take place. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and invite anyone that would like to speak with a planner to go ahead and go out to the atrium, and we can hand, some of you have them at the tables here. You can work on that handout out in the hallway with a planner to discuss what your current zoning is, what your proposed zoning is, and then if you get your questions answered and you want to stay and listen, you're welcome to come back in, or if you already know your proposed zoning and you're here to make a comment, you're welcome to just stay here as well. So,
I'd like to see a show of hands of who is here for the CDO discussion and input and public listening session. If you could give me a show of hands and how many people would like to speak. And when you do come to the podium, I request that you state your name, whether you live in the city or in the unincorporated areas of the county, and then begin for your 2-minute segment with with your concerns. So, so we have a good showing tonight. This is nice that we have a good showing, and we should begin. Okay, so would the first person come to the podium and please is there a sign-in sheet there tonight?
there's a sign-in sheet outside, but we can go ahead and organize one to be at the podium as
Yes.
well. But if whoever would like to come up first, we can get your name and information later. So feel free to go ahead and come on up.
I'll sign in when I get a chance. Hi, my name is Kyle Hannon. I've been working with the Envision Ellettsville project for a couple of years now. And that was referenced a little bit in your previous meeting, that was really a gathering of the public. Said, you know, a lot is happening in Ellettsville. We need to maybe get control of it, or at least understand better what's happening and figure out what it is we want as a community. And so through a series of public meetings and enormous public feedback, they developed the Envision Ellettsville plan, which is pretty good. And it's a great program. And not only that, we actually are doing implementation too. We're working on that. How about that? Get a plan and implement it. That doesn't always happen, both of those things. Anyway, so we're in the process of implementation. Their plan commission, I think a couple months ago, passed a new planning map, a land use plan map, and they're in the process of a UDO right now. And again, I appreciate the fact that you're saying, you know, wanting for feedback and listening to what's happening. I just wanted to make sure, just to reiterate, they've got a plan going on. They have a new map. They're working on a UDO. And I guess I would just encourage a lot of communication back and forth. They are being contacted a lot. That's the hot place for development now for both housing and businesses. So I just would encourage a lot of communication because there are things going on there a lot. The UDO process will be struggling to keep up with what they have going on. So Ellettsville, a lot happening there. And again, I just would encourage you, and I'm going to go look at the map out there, that exercise as well, and see if I can add anything to it. But again, a lot happening there. Keep talking back and forth.
We sure appreciate your coming in and sharing with us, this open avenue to communication between Monroe County and Ellettsville and what your vision is. And we appreciate any time that you'd like to share with us more of your vision and what has resulted from Envision Ellettsville. We'd
Great.
be very happy to talk with you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Good luck.
you.
This is a big project. I
Yes.
understand. So.
I've really admired the approach you've taken. Really admired it.
A lot of good
Thank
folks
you.
behind it. So
Yes,
good deal.
exactly. Thank
Thank you.
you. Okay.
We'll do the person
Okay,
people
yes.
on Zoom and then go back to the people in person. So it looks like Mike Hostetler has their hand raised. And if you can unmute yourself, Mike.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I think you answered my question. I'm here for the second part of this.
Okay.
With regard to Williams Way property, I just didn't know, I wasn't aware that this was a different kind of meeting, so I'll just sit here quietly.
Thank you, Mr. Hostetler. Okay. Do you want to go to the next person online?
If anyone online wishes to speak, if they'd like to go ahead and raise their hand on the Zoom. I do not see anyone.
Anyone else is in the room, if you would kindly come to the podium and identify yourself and whether you live in the city or in the county, and discuss your concerns or give us feedback on the CDO, we'd be grateful. Oh, it's good to see you again, Tamby. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Tamby. I am a Monroe County resident, and I have a couple of questions. One of them, it has to do with the carrying over of, I'll use that term, legacy use when it comes to a property that is Presently, it is a business. It's been in business since 1870. But what if something would happen to that? It's zoned residential. So what reassurances do I have that I could carry that forward as something else in this future CDO? Primarily because its use is not on a use chart. And in addition to that, I just wanted to also kind of bring to your attention and hope that you'll take a closer look at Chapter 822-18. I had emailed Jackie about this several months ago. This is regarding a provision for a hearing officer who can actually make BZA decisions. And so I was wondering, for those of you who have been on the Plan Commission or been involved in the BZA for quite a while, was that ever utilized, and is it something that could be utilized in the future? I guess it represents an avenue for someone who wants a design standard variance, special uses, conditional uses, and special exceptions, and it allows that person, that hearing officer, to make that decision as opposed to the whole thing going through the BZA process. So those are my two things. Oh, and last time I asked about how rural communities overlay could affect like an area like Clear Creek in a good or bad way. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
And Tammy, just a question on the business. You said since 1870. Are you referring to the post office? Okay, post office. Okay, just so we get the address and.
Okay.
Clear Creek Post Office.
Yes, Mr. Caritas?
Briefly, we did discuss the hearing officer. It's kind of gone back and forth. The city does that, and that was kind of the model that so it's been under discussion for a couple of years now, actually, Tammy. Good suggestion. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll proceed to the next person online. If there's anybody who is online and who is on Zoom, please raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your telephone to weigh in or to be recognized. Do you see anyone? No?
We do have 20 attendees, though. So
20
that's quite a
attendees.
few people listening in.
Okay, great. Would the next person in the room please come to the podium in order to state your concerns and participate in the CDO process?
Hi, my name is Mary Morgan. I'm with Heading Home of South Central Indiana, which is an organization working to strengthen housing security in our region. I'm a Monroe County resident, but I do live and rent within the city of Bloomington. The county has been a great partner with us in Heading Home, so we're appreciative of that. But I have to say I was really kind of stunned to see over 9,000 acres being recategorized from residential to rural. I understand that there is residential allowed in rural zoning, the proposed rural zoning, but the lot size is so large that really that will not impact our ability to increase the housing stock in the county. I work with people every day who can't find a place to live, whether it's a home or a rental. And it's just really important that we all work together to provide additional housing in our community. So I hope you'll reconsider that. And if you don't think that it's appropriate to have residential zoning in the area that's currently designated as residential, I hope you'll consider other areas that might increase density in more appropriate places. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Thank you. Is there anyone? Yes, Mr. Enright Randolph?
The public's edification, I'm curious if Jackie could highlight the area that was just mentioned that was being proposed.
Sure, the change from the residential to rural.
Yeah.
Sure, I can do that. I'm currently in one of the last public engagement meetings that we had was listed on the MonroeCDO.com website, so I'm pulling up that PowerPoint for reference, and I will pull up that information. So give me just 1 second. So we had our surveyor's office and our GIS person help us to put together just a map to visualize some of the changes that are happening across the county for both what's existing and then what's proposed. So on this TV screen here, what you have is existing is on the left and proposed is on the right. And I will pull up what the different colors mean. So yellow is residential and the green is rural. So as you shift back and forth, a large area that's going to be switching from residential to rural is north of the city of Bloomington, where my cursor is currently. And I'll just zoom in on that area here. And as part of the discussions that we had for that focus group, this area is fairly constrained due to floodplain and other considerations. So that's something that the Plan Commission has been made aware of. We've also discussed possibly changing some of the rural designations to be back to being residential because they don't meet minimum lot size, and there was a discussion that the Plan Commission would like to see the agricultural areas stay that 2.5 acre lot size. However, there's a lot of existing lots that are under that minimum threshold, and so staff is going to be changing a lot of those rural designations to residential to meet that smaller lot size, which would be about 1 acre, to match those existing. But as far as new development for new residential, those areas are largely proposed within the areas that are completely within the city of Bloomington. We do have those pockets of jurisdiction. And then also there was a discussion about the western side of the city as well as the southeast side of Ellettsville. So we are interested in getting some feedback from the public about what housing types and what scale is compatible for the county. We do have a fairly thorough use table of uses for residential, including single family attached, 2-family, townhome. We have single family attached 3+, and then we have multifamily 3 to 4, multifamily 5+. So we're just trying to get an understanding of what scale and what development type fits within different areas of the county. And so any and all of that feedback would be helpful from the public, from the Plan Commission. So I hope that answers some of your questions. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Do you see anybody online with their hand raised? Yes.
Looks like Ken online wishes to speak.
Ken, if you're able to unmute yourself, we'd like to hear from you. If you would state your name and whether you live in the city or in the county, and what your concerns are for the CDO.
And Ken, you're currently muted. I'm not seeing them able to unmute. So
Okay,
I think
Ken,
they might be
we'll try to come back to you, but we're not able to hear you. If you could look for your unmute button, it could be signified by a red microphone with a line through it. If you could figure out how to unclick that, that would be great. Otherwise, we move to the next participant online.
Like Mike Hostetler has his hand raised, so I'll go ahead and have him unmute again.
Mr. Hostetler, if you'd like to talk about the CDO.
Yeah, I just have a question. I can't tell by your screen here how far up you planned. I was curious what the change is, if any, around the Sample Road exit and where we live in Windsor Private.
Sure. So I'll go ahead and zoom out. This is the draft CDO zoning map. It's going to cover the entire unincorporated area of the county in addition to Steinsville. And so we have proposed zoning for the Sample Road area. This is the area right here for those that are in the neighborhood directly east of the Worms Way property, for instance. The current zoning is estate residential, and the proposed zoning district would be a suburban density residential. So it would be a similar zoning district between the two. There has been discussions by the Plan Commission, and we are wanting more feedback since Sample Road has been invested in and expanded. What type of possible limited business or other uses may be permitted out in this area. So if there is feedback for what might fit well in this district, that would be appropriate comments.
Okay, can I ask, the orange is the current area, it's actually, I thought it was actually zoned agricultural reserve.
Are you
is that
talking
not
about
correct?
the Worms Way property?
Well, yeah, the Worms Way and that property, and I thought our property too, and the Windsor Private was AGRR, maybe not.
No, it's currently zoned estate residential.
Okay, and it will become suburban, you said?
Yes, it's proposed to be suburban density residential.
And what's the main difference between those two?
Sure. So the lot sizes will remain the same. The biggest change will likely be in terms of setbacks. They'll actually be decreased a bit to match both the suburban density and estate residential combination, since we're trying to consolidate those two zones into one. And then there may be a few uses that you will want to take a look at to see the difference between those. For instance, tourist home or cabin has not historically been permitted in the suburban density type zone because that's largely what surrounds Lake Lemon. And then also you may want to look at other uses in the residential district.
Okay, so I heard you say cabin. You said something and then cabin.
Tourist home or cabin, that's like your Airbnb use.
Oh,
Do you want to
okay.
get into that?
Okay. All right, I was just curious. And the pink is, what does that represent?
Pink is currently pre-existing business, so what I have right now on the screen is current zoning, and then I'm flashing up the proposed zoning. So, yep. It will become limited business from pre-existing business.
Okay, all right, very good.
Thank you, Mr. Hostetler.
Thank you. I'll also note, anyone that's attending virtually, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at the draft zoning map, we encourage you to do so. You can search by parcel number or address, and if you click on a parcel or address, you can actually leave a feedback survey, and then that gets recorded, and planning staff will look at that at a later date and go through all of those comments. So if you have any questions, you can email us and reference the particular parcel or address that you're looking for, but also fill out the feedback survey. We will look at all of those, and we'll get in touch that way as well.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Okay, is the next person who is here in the room, would you like to come to the podium? Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name's Andrew Long, and I live in the county, actually in Windsor Private.
Yes.
And I'm here for that meeting, but I'm also wondering about this. Because changing Windsor Private from which is an executive neighbourhood, that's an upscale neighbourhood, and just rezoning that to suburban density doesn't look good on the property description if we're trying to sell a property, especially if what you're saying is an Airbnb could move into our neighbourhood and rent the house out to someone as a vacation home. That's going to reduce our property values. Okay, so that's one concern I really have about that. The second one was the difference between the surrounding rural reserve agricultural, changing it to, I don't know what the new designation is, it's like rural something. It's changing from green to green. So I don't know what that is, but if you could explain that, if there's any different use cases for that, I would appreciate it.
Yes, so I'm going Pull up the two-pager for the suburban density zoning district, and then we can go over any questions you might have. I think it just might be easier. So, and these are available in the hallway as well. So some of the primary uses that will be permitted in the suburban density, we have community institutional garden, logging as a use, which is by state code, we have to have that in every zone. Artificial pond or lake, emergency housing, short-term shelter, that's also required in every zone. Home occupation, manufactured home park is actually there in error. That's only allowed in a plan unit development. Residential facility for developmentally disabled. There's an asterisk on some of those uses, and it indicates that there's use-specific standards. I'll go through, and so short-term rental, owner-occupied, personal service use, bed and breakfast. Yeah, so any comments that you have on some of these uses or the zoning designation that you are in, the driving force behind your neighborhood switching from estate residential to suburban density is your lot size. The suburban density is, we're labeling it that because it's 1 acre lot size, suburban type development, so.
So is saying Airbnb allowed under the present estate?
Let me check that before I answer that question. Okay, so this is our current zoning use table, and under estate residential, tourist home or cabin is a conditional use, which means that if you meet all the conditions and you go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, you could be granted that use.
Okay, but it's not automatic, whereas the new one, anyone could just do that without approval.
No, so under the new zoning district, it's also under conditional use.
Okay.
Tourist home or cabin is still under the conditional use.
Okay, okay.
Mr. Long, where that tourist cabin use is that's close to Windsor Private on the map? Because you had mentioned that there was a tourist cabin in the area use, or?
I'm not sure, there isn't a tourist home that I'm aware of in that area,
Okay.
but there is, Worms Way is
Yes.
the next item
Yes.
on the agenda under the administrative business, and
Yes.
so that area is right to the west of this
I see.
neighborhood.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
Thank you.
Thank you, and so we'll move now and see if Ken is able to unmute himself. And then if not, we'll go to the next person online.
I don't see Ken's hand raised anymore.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Is there another person with their hand, his or her hand raised?
Not at the moment. If anyone on Zoom wishes to speak. Okay, Mike has his hand raised again, but do you want, maybe they have a question, or do you wanna?
Mr. Hostetler, we will follow up with you after we've gone through all the first round of inputs from the participants in the room and online. But please stay tuned. We know you're going to be here till the end, so we'll come back to you later. So would the next person in the room please come to the microphone who would like to speak? Ms. Pearl, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming today.
Can you see me over the podium?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much. My name is Jen Pearl, and I live in the city but represent the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. And we serve members across all of Monroe County in private sector, but also public, nonprofit, and educational sectors as well. So just wanted to thank you for all of the work that's gone into this. There's been, I can't imagine the hours that have gone into it, and the staff has been incredibly responsive. We really appreciate it. And then also thank you to the Plan Commission as well. There have been a lot of good updates to the CDO. We did have a couple of items that we wanted to raise. So one was related to the comments earlier around housing, reducing the acreage of residential housing. we are concerned about the challenges that can pose for the development of affordable and workforce housing given land costs. The information that we had gotten from the Board of Realtors from spring was that $72,000 was the median cost of residential land per acre. So we are concerned about what that can mean for people trying to develop on parcels of, 1 acre, 2.5 acres or more. Our median year-to-date sales price for homes, single-family homes in Monroe County was around $290,000 in July of this year, compared to around $193,000 in Owen County and $175,000 in Lawrence County. So this can be very challenging for families since the median household income here is around $54,000 based on U.S. Census Bureau data. And then home sales inventory has remained low as well. We're concerned that workers and employers both lose out with a lack of attainable housing. Some of our largest employers report pulling around half of their employees from outside of the community. Commuting employees pay more in transit and time when they have to move outward to find attainable housing. And commuting also has an environmental impact. And Monroe County also loses out on the income taxes of these individuals, which is paid based on where they live. So that was the items we wanted to raise around housing. Around employment land, we continue to have limited land for employment growth in the community as well. Our existing employers are actually struggling to find places to expand in their properties. We've also seen an uptick in opportunities, which I think my colleague Clark Greiner had mentioned in earlier meetings as well. And some folks have asked us, well, why are you still trying to support the growth of future employers if we know unemployment rates are low? Because of what we've seen with the global economy, unfortunately, we can't control the global economy. We wish we could. And looking in our own history, we've seen employers and industries change over time. Just look at RCA, Thompson Consumer Electronics, Otis Elevator, et cetera. So we need to make sure that we're preparing properly for existing employers as well as those that may wish to come into our community. We are seeing an uptick in opportunities coming from the U.S. CHIPS and Science Act and the growth of tech in our community as well. The ideas that we had for ways to address this, one is creating an overall vision for the community which balances the needs of residents and employers while preserving quality of place. We do, acknowledge and realize, rural areas are really important, both for quality of life as well as, for people who want to live in this community. So how can we make sure that we're balancing the needs of both? So taking an overall vision and developing a vision for those things we think would be important. On housing, number 2, retain and expand land of suitable sizes to meet housing needs. So the sites that were mentioned earlier, southwest or southeast Ellettsville and some of the other parcels, it's very encouraging to see the opportunities that might be there. Third, around employment is designating sufficient land zone for business and industry to prepare for our current and future employment in key sectors. Fourth is monitoring and expanding critical infrastructure like broadband, sewer, and water. Monroe County has American Rescue Plan Act funds available right now that are under consideration for use. Knowing some of the areas may be flood prone or other areas may need sewer or water infrastructure, that could be a consideration for using those resources to build out in areas designated for growth. And then finally is development processes. Streamlining and communicating and digitizing development processes can actually lower administrative burden on the government as well as for folks that are trying to come in and do business here. So that is all we had to share, and I wanted to thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pearl.
Thank
you for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. Okay, the next person who is online, does anybody have their hand raised? If you're on Zoom and you'd like to address the Plan Commission and give your input on the CDO, please raise your virtual hand, or if you're calling in, press *9 to be recognized. Do you see anyone, Ms. Nestor Jelen? Okay, then we turn now to the next person in the room who would come to the podium and state your name and whether you live in the city or the county and what your concerns are on the CDO process.
Hello, My name is Peter Iverson. I am currently serve on the Monroe County Council, and I'm a Monroe County resident. First of all, I want to commend the work that's gone on here. It is fantastic to see the streamlining of zone uses from what used to be quite many to down to quite a few. That makes it much easier to read maps like this. It makes it much easier to understand what's going on. Also, excuse me, it's wonderful to see everything online. Using Elevate, it makes it very easy to understand what's going on. It's wonderful. I have two questions. The first question is, based on the Monroe County Blue Ribbon Climate Resilience Body, we know from the data that our community is going to face increased flooding and increased high heat days into the future. We know this is going to happen. What does this plan do to make sure that we're keeping our residents safe? And the second question I have is, there's really interesting research that's coming out of the state looking at runaway growth, in that when you have these low density areas, it's taking over a lot of the farmland. And it's a pretty scary scenario what's happening all across Indiana. And one of the things that I think you mentioned earlier in the planning department was you wanted some feedback on the types of housing that you wanted to see. And I think we're hearing from some of our agencies that certainly they're giving you some feedback on higher density homes, higher density residential areas. And one of the things that I keep hearing, whether it's on the efforts that we're doing to ensure that we have treatment for individuals suffering from substance use disorder, mental health, or behavioral health, is that there's just simply not enough space for folks to go to. And when we hear from those agencies talking to us about those individuals that need support, they furthermore say that their staff simply cannot afford to live here. It's just an increasing issue that we keep hearing about, whether it's on the committees that we staff to make sure that we're having treatment, that we're having the jail expansion, or whether it's talking about climate change. So my two questions to you are, how does this address climate resilience? And number two is, how do we make sure that people can afford to live here? And my thought is, what are we doing in terms of some of the multifamily homes? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Iverson.
I'll try and address a few of those comments, but it sounds like we might have a few conversations after the meeting and with the Plan Commission. In terms of flooding, we have seen quite a few natural disasters within the last 5 years. We've seen several tornadoes, several flooding events, unfortunately. And so I think that in terms of flooding, we are in a good position in that our state actually has a higher threshold than just using the FEMA maps. We actually have a best available map that is more strict and better studied. We do have a floodplain administrator on staff, and so we are trying to mitigate and prevent, basically vulnerable housing to be located in the floodplain, and making sure that if there is development in the floodplain, it meets all of the standards and requirements. But as much as we can, use zoning to disincentivize new development in areas prone to flooding, so that we don't see issues with public health or safety or any other issues that we see there, and maybe make those areas more for parks and recreation, trails, things like that are okay if floodwaters come in and no one is harmed because they don't live there or they don't habitate there. So that's the flooding question. High heat questions. We do have a landscaping chapter that whenever someone is developing in Monroe County commercial development, they do have to put in street trees and a lot of different landscaping requirements, especially for parking areas. So big parking lots can be kind of heat islands and attract heat to areas. So we're trying to make sure that we mitigate that as much as we can with new development and putting back trees. And also we hope to have a better incentivized landscaping chapter for preserving trees, because we know that also assists with that. And then as far as multifamily density, we do have a allowance for multifamily currently in the county. When we took over the areas the areas beyond the city of Bloomington jurisdiction. So we're interested in hearing from the Plan Commission and from the public of what scale is appropriate. Recently, at the last listening session, I brought up the example of Hayden Flats. That's actually a property that's in the county jurisdiction that was by right development because it was in an area that was previously had jurisdiction by the city of Bloomington, and that zoning designation allowed that level of housing. So that's kind of probably the highest scale that we've seen in a very long time. So we have quite a few examples of different housing types that, I brought up the example of Hayden Flats. They currently have 100% occupancy, and they've only been opened for a few weeks. So we reached out to them to see what their occupancy levels were. So
just broken ground on Westgate with 300 new multifamily units.
Right. So we're just trying to understand what the right scale is for the county, and if you have feedback for that. I think we've heard from a lot of different people, a lot of different entities, but it's helpful to have that more exact information, because we will have to write it into the code, and we can't be broad about it. We have to actually say, this many units per acre, and that's the type of information that we still need to narrow down.
Of course. Is it okay if I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
I don't know who to address that to. Do we have word yet from Bloomington Transit about where their lines are going to be extended into any of these areas?
I don't believe so. I think that was discussed at the last meeting that we were as well. Yeah.
And another one very responsible thing that Monroe County has done is we have a sinkhole conservancy area, and we have quite a few complex sinkholes, and we have required setbacks so that we can protect the property and treasure of our community members as they build on kind of very fragile ground.
I agree. That was a good point, and I was actually going to ask Jackie, as part of this kind of rewrite, we're actually separating some of the responsibilities that are in the zoning ordinance that are going to now find their way in our stormwater ordinance. And that kind of goes to his broader question of what we're doing to kind of protect kind of these environmental resources. There also is a stormwater ordinance and a drainage ordinance, and we're identifying the most appropriate places to put some of these ordinance in.
Also a building on slope restriction ordinance, so that especially in the ecologically sensitive areas that could lead to siltification of our community's drinking water supply, we have restrictions on disturbance of the soil and building on various grades of slope, so that we can protect what sustains us, which is water.
Great. Well, thank you, and I look forward to having more conversations about some of these things.
Thank you, Councilmember Iverson. And is there somebody online who would like to speak? If you could raise your virtual hand on Zoom.
Tonda.
Tonda, if you can unmute yourself, we'd like to hear from you. If you could state your first and last name and whether you live in the city or in the county. We'd like to hear from you.
Thank you. My name is Tonda Radawan. I live in Bloomington city limits. I do have a property in the county, and I guess I would like to continue to encourage those in the county and people that are involved with this to continue talking with the community about right-sized housing. I'm very encouraged to hear the request for community output or input, and also people that have talked before me, Peter Iverson and Jen Pearl, talking about the necessity to really be focused on what the housing needs are and have that be right-sized housing. One of the things that I do in part of my, work is I work with an eviction prevention project, and a lot of calls actually come in from people that have housing instability. They're not necessarily facing eviction, and I've noticed an uptick in calls coming from our seniors, those that have lived or that have worked productive lives. They've contributed to the local economy in many ways, and now they're at a point where they've retired, and that retirement income is fixed often, and they're very concerned, or at least the people that are calling are concerned, because they do not have the same income to match the housing costs that are out there. Talked to a lot of people where maybe they're a widow or a widower and they are now choosing to move out of their family homes and into rental housing, and the concern of that being affordable. We do have some senior housing developments which are waitlisted sometimes up to about a year, and I think that often they're forgotten in and when we're looking at the housing options in the county and the city. And if we're looking more at kind of a better built option, if we're looking at ways that we can look at multifamily housing options, even duplexes and triplexes, or smaller scale single family homes that can have a community feel or community base. That seems to be what I'm hearing is the need and the desire, would be housing for individuals that is smaller and affordable and does not need as much land and has more density, that is closer to public transit options. And it's something to consider as our workforce also starts aging and is getting close to retirement age.
Thank you, Ms. Radawan. Thank you for your input. I'd like to just make one comment because we are in the budget hearings for the county, and as we are talking about housing affordability and the real life needs of people who are working all the way through their retirement, nothing makes for a better retirement than earning a good, honest wage. And I would like to urge the county council to consider a cost of living increase for the county workers so that we can make our employees more secure and more comfortable. And, you know, nothing can promote housing security more than living wages. So everyone who's in this room and the participants and stakeholders we have, the more we can attract high-quality jobs to our community, the better off will be housing security. So I'd like to state that and to make sure that that point of view is represented. And thank you, Ms. Radawan, for weighing in today about housing stability, especially with regard to the elderly. When that people meet their fixed income, having had a good income promotes for stability and quality of life. So thank you. Is there anyone online who would like to speak? Does somebody have their hand raised and we have a virtual presentation to make? Do you see anyone? Or if you're calling in by phone, if you would press *9 or raise your virtual hand on Zoom. Okay. If the next person...
I'd like to ask a follow-up question, if possible, about tourist homes. Is that okay?
Yes, Tammy.
All right, thank you so much for your time. So I just want to ask a little bit about the tourist home discussion that we had previously, because I know I remembered hearing a few years ago that you could have an Airbnb in your home, and that tourist, I don't know when it fully came into existence, that a tourist home itself that you're purchasing for that purpose, is that still differentiated from running your own Airbnb room in your home? The reason I ask this comment is I do think that Airbnb can provide housing security for some people who are barely making their mortgage payment. And sometimes they will buy a home that costs a little bit more because they're like, maybe I could Airbnb it on the weekends when there's a home football game, and that's going to help me pay my mortgage. I think this is something that needs to be considered when it comes to security for paying your mortgage. Especially some of these young folks who are just now getting into a home, and it helps them have reassurance that they can keep their home. So if you could provide some insight into that question, thank you.
Sure. So we currently have 2 uses, bed and breakfast, which is operator occupied, and then short-term, or we have a tourist home or cabin, which does not have to be owner or operator occupied. And so under the new ordinance, we're hoping to add a use which would be short-term rental owner occupied and have that be permitted with standards in several zones, but that would be some sort of affidavit or commitment that the person that owns the property would actually be living there full-time while people were renting it is the thinking. So looking for feedback on that as well. That we have it under the, this is page 64 of Module 2, and this is under personal services. And so we have it currently listed as permitted with standards for those options. That would be a third sort of rental option for people. That answers the question. We
Thank
do
you.
have 2 people with their hand raised online.
Okay.
Can I speak to that before we move on?
Yes,
Just real
Mr.
quickly?
Pittsford, of course.
Just an observation. I came across an article recently that said that in the city of Austin, Texas, their housing availability has been affected by folks actually buying houses and paying their mortgage through Airbnb, and they're not even living in them. So as we start looking at the opportunity for Airbnb, that's something that we need to really be able to control, because, I mean, that's significant in a city the size of Austin if it is such a common practice that it actually is affecting their housing inventory. It could happen here as well. So thank you for that
Yes,
brief.
Thank you, Mr. Pittsford. Okay. You said that there are 2 people online who would like to speak?
Yes. And just to comment or respond to Jerry's point, they're one of the 2 most popular questions we get in our office is, can I have a tourist home at this property, and can I have an accessory dwelling unit at this property? And so the tourist home right now, as it stands, does not require the owner to occupy the property. So we are seeing people purchase properties, not live there, rent them. And so having another option, possibly where you require the owner to be there and then make it stricter for people to not live there and rent it, could be something. So.
Right. Well, and even in places where that does occur and it's allowed, it does impact property values.
Okay, we have a phone number. It ends in 2877, and I'm going to see if they are able to unmute themselves.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. This is Peter Gould. I live in Monroe County. And I wanted to make a couple of points. I guess, and I think your sense is that in doing the CDO, we don't overstep. We're thoughtful and careful with it. Because once you've done it wrong, there's no going back. And the clearest example of that is the effect of limited UDO. You can just look at the scale of construction on Walnut College, 3rd and Grand downtown, and what's happening on East 3rd Street because of bypass and 446. Scale is really important, and equally important, I think, is the effect of architectural and design standards that might mute the scale and make it more compatible. I am definitely in the camp, as many other speakers have been, that we keep rural and keep urban. I noticed that the CDO does focus on minimum lot size, but I'm just throwing it out for about increasing lot size and ag reserve, and maybe forest reserve to preserve it discussed today and at the other meetings, and the infill to areas with infrastructure that can support the increased density. Instead of another thought, again, be careful with the instead of increase in these in actual reserve to possibly reduce. When under the module 2, the number of uses in this chart has been reduced substantially. And while it does tend to simplify things, it does eliminate the granular control that we currently have on uses. So before we compress them to oblivion, maybe we ought to look at the granular effect of that compression. I do think that better design standards for main field, we already addressed density setback. I don't know if we do, Jackie, you would know, do anything with building to land ratio. But certainly in the rural urban, where I think growth in the whole residential may occur, maybe we need more architectural guidelines to put compatibility with the existing urban areas, like Smithville, Unionville, other urban areas, so that we're not ending up with new developments that totally change the character of the existing town in a bad way. I'd like to comment on the wholesale change of Ag, Rural Reserve, and Watershed to conservation residential. I think conservation residential implies development, and I would like to see Ag, Rural Reserve kept as is. Jackie mentioned in the August 29th session that we should separate them from overlay restrictions. I totally agree, which is, I think, we need to keep Ag, Rural Reserve. I will comment on the use of group homes. I think we should stay as is, permitted in LD and GD, variance required in other zones. Based on 700 miles of county roads, the proposed change could allow over 1,200 group homes, and I don't know that we have either the infrastructure or the administrative capability to deal with it. I'd like to comment on PUDs because it seems that in a lot of cases they're used to sidestep our county vision. My first is a question, do we have an inventory of all existing PUDs in progress or dormant? Jackie, do we have that?
Yes, we do have a list of all of the PUDs in the county. There's 102.
Already built or already built or ghost? Are they built or?
Primarily built out, and I'd say 75% of those are within the 2-mile fringe area of the city of Bloomington.
And do we have, how many are latent that have not, that are dormant?
Well, we'd have to probably break it down even further to partial development.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
There's many are at least partially constructed.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Gold.
No problem. So I do think that in some cases it's too convenient a way to sidestep our county vision. And there have been, I don't need to name the ones that haven't turned out real well. But I'm wondering if we couldn't add a rule like they have for a building permit where a PUD would expire after X years if not completed within that time. Because what's happened is, for especially the older PUD, I think you're hearing one of them maybe later tonight, that is so old that it's using old zoning rules and the bond looks pretty low for plans with drainage, that kind of thing. I think that would protect us a little if they expired after refreshment. And kind of a similar question, or a similar comment regarding pre-existing non-conforming use. And I think you can almost parse them into two groups. Some that seem very appropriate and compatible with the areas in the work, and others that are detrimental. I'm just wondering if we have any inventory of those, Jackie?
Yes, Peter, you're a little bit quiet, so I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. But to repeat your question, you're asking if there's an inventory of all of the pre-existing non-conforming properties in the county?
Yeah, do we have that?
I don't believe we have a list of all of those properties, but we could pull. I wonder if your question is like how many properties are zoned residential that have a business on them, or vice versa?
Well, you know, it would seem, and I think what brought this to mind is when Mr. Billingsley spoke about his property on Fairfax Road, about his boat business. And, you know, in cases where maybe the pre-existing non-conforming use is one that's appropriate for that area, would this be the time, rather than continuing it on ENCU basis, to actually bring it in to zoning?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Myers, if you wanted to comment.
I just want to comment that we do have other speakers on
Yes.
the Zoom call that will
Yes.
have their hand raised as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gould, for being so engaged in the technicalities of this process. Thank you. Okay. So we move now to the room. If there's someone in the room who would like to speak on the CDO or to have their input. I see no one. We do have somebody online who has their virtual hand raised.
Peter Gerdes.
Mr. Gervis, if you could unmute yourself, we'd like to hear from you. Hi.
Hi, great. Yeah, I had one sort of question and one sort of comment. I guess my question is there any sense of, sort of, if you sort of restrict rural uses, is that going to just end up sending people to further away locations of rural uses? Like, is this merely like saving the, is this merely saving density here at the cost of people, sort of sprawled other places, or do you know if that would, do you have any idea about that? I guess the comment I wanted to make was just, think about things with like, I'm very worried about the complexity of the overall regulation, be it like architecture or these or other sorts of concerns, creating a raising the cost of development, and that each one of these rules we apply, it's not just is it a good idea or not? Is it a good enough idea that we should make the make development that much more expensive? All right, great, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We do not currently have architectural standards in the county or minimum building size for residences. So that's something that if we do implement architectural standards for residential, that would be a change. So.
Thank you, Ms. Nestor Jelen.
And then the last person with their hand raised online, I think, is Mr. Hostetler. You had a continuing question. And then I will say we'll probably need to pivot to the administrative meeting after that if we don't have anyone else in the room for
Wonderful.
this.
So, Mr. Hostetler, we'd like to hear from you again. I'm sorry that we had to put you off till this point in the meeting, but if you would kindly unmute yourself and share your thoughts with us.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate my multiple bites at the apple here. One item, totally endorsed what Mr. Gold said with regard to the rural reserve, agricultural reserve and the rural property. We need to keep that. I can't imagine why we get rid of that, but that's one issue. The other is a clarifying point with regard to Windsor Private, converting it from the executive designation now to suburban, whatever it was. You said the lots would be you know, a minimum of an acre, but we're already, there's no lots that small already in Windsor Private. So that we can, I don't think there's a single lot in Windsor Private that's less than 3 acres. So I don't know what purpose that would be. And then the other comment I had was with regard to the PUDs. If you make it available for a PUD, then it looks like to me, based on that chart you had up, somebody could put a trailer park in pretty easily as something they want to do. Am I seeing that right? Am I right about the acreage as well?
Yeah, just to answer the first question and then the second. So the first question you had was in regards to your minimum lot size of Windsor Private. We can take a look at that entire development. After the 1 acre minimum lot size, the next size up for the zoning districts is 2.5 acres. So if not all of the lots meet that 2.5 acres, we would be making some of those pre-existing non-conforming, which we would prefer to avoid that if possible for lots that currently have a 1 acre minimum lot size.
I'm pretty sure we're all at least 2.5, if not 3. I'm the vice president on the HOA board. I can definitely get a list for you, but you know, I know most of them are around 4 or 5 acres.
Okay. So yeah, I think the consolidation of the zoning districts from the current to proposed made it so that because you're a state residential right now, the next zoning district akin to that is suburban density. So we'll take a look at that. And then your next question about planned unit developments. So if a property applies for a planned unit development zoning, they would have to designate what the uses are of that PUD. So if it was going to be a planned unit development for a manufactured home park, they would have to state that as part of the request for the rezone.
Okay, so they would have to request that. It wouldn't be automatic.
No, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hostetler. Mr. Pittsford, did you have a comment that you?
I was just going to make an observation that the overlying zoning, if they are a development that has covenants and restrictions, they can have a more restrictive lot size on there and protect their own interests by mutual agreement of all the neighbors in the subdivision, and then the zoning would be consistent with other areas around, commensurate to what the county sees as the best and highest use in that area. Just because we define a minimum lot standard of 1 acre doesn't mean that developers are not entitled to do larger lot subdivisions and maintain those. You know, it doesn't say, oh, well, you're a state residential, you must have. You know, it just says that's a minimum, you know. So anybody wishing to protect their executive residential status can do so through covenants and restrictions. We're looking at the best and highest use for the property in the county, not the best and highest opportunity for the individual owner or the developer.
Thank you, Mr. Pittsford. Are there any other comments or questions or from the people who are here in the room, or if there's anybody online or on the telephone who would like to be recognized to participate in the CDO process? I don't see anyone. Do you see anyone? Okay, then we'll move to our administrative portion of our meeting. Well, I should turn first to members of the Plan Commission to see if there are comments from the Plan Commission. Yes, Mr. Enright Randolph.
It goes back to that pre-existing non-conforming question and kind of getting a breakdown. It'd be really neat if we do have any data that can be provided to get a sense of how many pre-existing non-conforming parcels are out there. That might be a big ask, but I've been really harping on this for quite some time now, so I think having kind of a overview of what is out there would be great. So.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can we entertain a brief recess so that we can empty the room?
Yes, we can have a few minutes of a recess, maybe 5 minutes. Is that satisfactory? And then we'll reconvene for the administrative portion of the meeting, and Mr. Morris will take over Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming for giving this input, this important input on the CDO. We value all of your thoughts and your concerns, and we are taking note. Thank you.